As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So recent media reports have said that there are discussions within the Biden administration to condition military aid to Israel if it invades Rafah as a way to reduce civilian casualties. So if you read those reports, the assumption is that they're talking about the U.S. threatening to cut off military aid to Israel or reducing military aid, reducing the weapon supply to Israel. But according to a report from ABC News, the U.S. might do the opposite. So this report cited U.S. officials who said that the U.S. has not made a decision on leveraging military aid, and it said that it's possible additional aid, not less, would be offered as incentive to reduce civilian casualties. So the idea that they might give Israel more weapons to reduce civilian casualties, I mean, it's completely absurd. I guess this shouldn't really be a surprise because as I've covered these reports a little bit, there's just a few of them that said the U.S. Biden was considering conditioning aid if they invade Rafah. You know, I was very doubtful of them. And I mean, if this is what they're talking about, increasing the aid, listen, we'll give you more weapons if you kill less civilians. At the same time, they're buying all of Israel's lies and propaganda, so it wouldn't really mean anything. And so U.S. officials made these comments in response to a senior Israeli official complaining that U.S. weapon shipments were not coming fast enough. This Israeli official said that in the wake of October 7th, U.S. weapons were coming very fast, but that now they are finding it's very slow. So in response to that, U.S. officials denied that there was any intentional slowdown in weapon shipments to Israel. So essentially what they said here was, no, if any, we're actually considering giving them more. You know, you see these reports about us conditioning aid. We're not doing that. We're actually considering giving them more. So John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, he was asked if there was any sort of slowdown. And his response was, quote, "I'm not going to get into the timeline for every individual system that's being provided. We continue to support Israel with their self-defense needs. That's not going to change, and we have been very, very direct about that," end quote. So British military officials advise that Ukraine should focus on defense in its ground fight against Russia in the east, while focusing on targeted strikes against Crimea and Russia's Black Sea Fleet. And this was reported by the Sunday Times. And this advice was given when British Defense Secretary Grant Shapps and UK Army Chief Anthony Radakin visited Ukraine last week. The British official said that rather than attacking, Ukrainian forces should hold the line and pull back to more favorable ground if necessary, and that they're talking about the battlefield in eastern and southern Ukraine. But they're saying that this will allow Ukrainian forces to focus their efforts on the Black Sea and Crimea, where their forces, with the help of Western long-range missiles, have hit targets over the past 6 months. So this is really incredibly provocative to think about. You have these high-level British officials going over there and telling Ukraine, you know, those missiles we gave you, just keep hitting Crimea and Russia's Black Sea Fleet with them. And attacks on Crimea have always been considered a red line for Putin, but that hasn't stopped Ukraine's Western backers from facilitating and supporting them. And this visit came after that recording of German military officers talking that was published by Russian media revealed that the British troops in Ukraine, on the ground in Ukraine, are helping them fire the Storm Shadow missiles, which have a range of 155 miles. I was looking just through TASS media reports. TASS is one of the Russian state media outlets, just searching, Storm Shadows and Crimea, and there's multiple reports of Ukraine using them in attacks on Crimea. And the UK has also helped Ukraine strike Russian ships in the Black Sea. There was another recent report from the Times that credited Radakin, who again is the head of the British army. They credited him with the Ukrainians' strategy to destroy Russian ships, with basically helping create that strategy to destroy Russian ships. And Ukrainian attacks on Crimea and territory inside the Russian mainland have increased a lot over the past few months, as it's been clear Ukraine cannot win on the battlefield. Since Russia captured the strategic Donetsk city of Avdiivka last month, Russian forces have been making steady gains in the east, and Ukraine is suffering from serious manpower and weapon shortages. But they want to use these longer-range missiles that they have from NATO. So Niger announced on Saturday that it was suspending military cooperation with the U.S. and that the U.S. presence in the country was no longer justified, signaling that the U.S. will have to withdraw its troops from Niger. So Colonel Major Amadou Abda Rahman, who's a spokesman for the military-led government, made the announcement after a U.S. delegation visited Niger. He said that the U.S. officials did not show respect for Niger's sovereignty. He said, quote, Niger regrets the intention of the American delegation to deny the sovereign Nigerian people the right to choose their partners and types of partnerships capable of truly helping them fight against terrorism, end quote. So this is a big deal because the U.S. has a big drone base in Niger known as Air Base 201, which costs over $100 million to build, and it's used as a hub for U.S. operations in West Africa. And before Mohamed Bazoum was taken out of power last July, the U.S. had about 1,100 troops in Niger. As of December, the U.S. had 648 troops stationed in the country. So the U.S. formally declared that the ouster of Bazoum was a coup, which requires the suspension of U.S. military aid. But the U.S. was looking for ways to cooperate with the junta to maintain its military presence.
Before we get to that threat assessment, which with the process of which I know you're familiar, you at one point participated in them. What do you think happens when Ukraine to NATO when Ukraine loses this war to Russia? It's really a defeat of NATO, is it not?
It is, and NATO will never be the same. Now, it will take years to dissolve or dissipate. That mostly has to do with the bureaucracy. There are a lot of good jobs at NATO. There are a lot of really fancy buildings and so forth. But it's pretty much gone because what Biden is saying to them, even very publicly, look, we're not going to put soldiers, troops in Ukraine, okay? Well, that means that these Swedes and these Finns that were relying on the U.S. to come in with troops and everything else in case they're attacked, in the unlikely case they're attacked, well, maybe that was a bad idea to come into NATO. What's NATO worth to these people anymore if the United States will not put troops on the ground? Now, if Putin wanted to go into Poland, I don't know why you do that, or into the Baltic states or any other NATO member, then it would be the automatic putting in place of that mutual defense obligation. He had no intention of doing that. And when people ask him, am I going to do that? He keeps saying, put your move. Why would I do that? What doesn't make any sense? Okay. So it's all kind of, it's political. It's designed to show that the Europeans are doing their part, They're willing to seize Russian assets, at least the interest of the Russian gold that's in Brussels now. They're willing to raise the notion that Macron might be supported by people like the Poles and like the Baltics in putting troops in Ukraine. But once they do it, Putin is saying, look, you people, don't you get it? Once you do that, you're at war with Russia, okay? And we have all manner of ways to take care of you, even places like Paris, Berlin, wherever, we can strike them. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a nuclear weapon. If push comes to shove, it could be, but these weapons are so accurate and they're so powerful, these hypersonic missiles, that they would use those first, I'm pretty sure, rather than risk the kind of escalation that would go to a nuclear war.
What assessments say about North Korea, Ray?
Well, they said that North Korea has a bunch of weapons that they tested, a lot of liquid fuel weapons, but and they have a solid fuel weapons, which is Hwasong 18, period. Now, this latest weapon, which has now been tested, has been given to them by Vladimir Putin and the Russians. It is one of their late model ICBMs. It has chaff containers and everything else, to decoys to defy ABM systems, and most important, it's mobile. So unless you find it right before it fires this missile,
how far can it go? Can it reach Los Angeles?
It can reach Miami Beach or Palm Beach. It can reach all of the continental United States. Now they've had that capability before, but never from such a sophisticated weapon. I am shocked that Vladimir Putin would give this to any other country, North Korea especially, maybe. But he's done it, and nobody's willing to face into that, except some of the advisors I have who have been around a long time and know what this means and tell me, look, Ray, this is really dangerous because unless Putin has some sort of fail-safe device built into the software, the North Koreans are free to use this thing.
Well, what do we do when Putin gives a weapon of this destructive magnitude and capability to a crazy person?
We ignore it. This was raised 6 months ago, first on this program, actually. And Jacob Sullivan was asked about it 3 days later. And he said, oh, yeah, we're aware of that. We're having our intelligence people look at it. Nothing since then. There have been attempts to deride this analysis of Ted Postal and others who know what end is up on this stuff. but there's no addressing this. It's too embarrassing. The Russians would do. You would think they would try to blacken the Russians by doing this, but it's really kind of interesting that they shy away from saying, "Look, this is what we have wrought." The Russians are so angry and so eager to have a manifold retaliatory capability that even the North Koreans now are in receipt of, well, the next to most sophisticated ICBM that the Russians produce.
Back to the threat assessment before we finish. Does it tell the president how many troops from foreign countries are on the ground in Ukraine? How many French, how many Germans, how many Poles?
I don't think it does, but the Ministry of Defense in Moscow just 3 days ago said there were, see if I remember this, 36,000 foreign volunteers, foreign mercenaries in Ukraine, 6,000 of whom have been killed. That, I think, is what the Ministry of Defense said. I may be wrong on the threat assessment, but I don't recall it being included in the threat assessment.
But so we're talking about mission capable versus combat capable. And this is what this article says. Within the environs of the military-industrial congressional complex, mission capable is a highly ambiguous term that allows for a whole lot of gaming of the accountability metrics. It's worth noting that at a 55% mission capable rate, the F-35 is still well below the program targets of 90%. In other words, the F-35 fleet as a whole is nowhere near meeting its mission capability goal of being able to do anything at all. But then when you talk about full mission capable, which means combat or whatever is asked of it, go to the next one. It's an even worse story. So even for someone who is an F-35 realist, the article continues, the results are shocking. Not only is the F-35 fleet's full mission capable rate in the neighborhood of 30%, and it says see page 96 of the report, the full mission capable rate of the Marine Corps F-35B was a miserable 15.5% in March of 2023. So 15% mission capable for the U.S. Marines. That means if you get into a spot of bother, you're not going to be able to rely on these planes.
What are they going to do? Build more planes, I guess. But this is something that has to be addressed. And we have the investigators there, the people who are supposed to watch things, and they're supposed to watch where does the money go? Is it well spent? And where is the equipment? And all we have to do right now, there's been an enlightenment with the American people because they watched, the evacuation of Afghanistan. Yep. Rather messy, but I think it was horrible because we went in. But it was every bit as messy when they were leaving Vietnam. Yeah. It's all this big bold bragging about how we're going in there and save some country here. It's in this for our national defense purposes, and so that's how we get in with all the hype. But Vietnam, what a tragedy. The only thing we can say here is we've spent more money on what's going on currently, but less body bags are coming in, so they're not as visible. In Vietnam, foreign policy was measured by body bags, but still a lot of people die. Sometimes they're at our hands, and sometimes it's done and hidden because they're on the receiving end of these bombs, and we don't generally count all the civilians that die from this.
Yeah, and I was on an interview last week, and someone asked me, well, when do you think the American middle class is going to wake up to all of this spending? And I said, the military stuff. And they said, they're going to realize it's a ripoff. It's not patriotic. You're being ripped off. And this is the F-35 is a great example. And the other one is our next story, which is the Ukraine fiasco, is another example of the American people just being ripped off. The government has no appropriate custodial view of the money that they take from us or print from us. Put on, skip one, go to the next one, the real clear investigations. The Government Accountability Office says it is unclear if the Pentagon tracking reports of misused aid in Ukraine. And I'm just going to do the opening paragraph from this if we can put the next one on. So the GAO looked into it, and they have no idea whether the Pentagon's tracking the weapons we're sending to Ukraine. So while the Pentagon has assured Congress that no U.S. military equipment sent to Ukraine has been diverted, stolen, or otherwise misappropriated, they assured them, a new report from the Government Accountability Office could not determine if the Department of Defense was tracking the allegations of misuse 2 years into the conflict. And here's a quote: "If you never look, you will never find it." A source familiar with how the report was compiled said of the worst case possibility that aid was being misappropriated. So they're saying, we have no record of the aid being misappropriated. Well, are you checking it? Well, no.
We don't record that.
Yeah.
But so, the Pentagon, they probably are lying through their teeth, but the GAO's probably half true.
Yeah.
They don't know, but you had the answer. Why don't they know? Well, we don't look at that kind of thing. So that's why there's nothing wrong with the Federal Reserve because we've checked the records. Yeah, we checked the records. Yeah, like fun. You don't check the records, so you can't say, where did some of this money go, and how is this operated? Who did it benefit? So this whole idea that it's open government is, a bit of a farce. But that is one thing that I think if we could get more of a unity on demanding that, it would be better. I remember when I was working on Audit the Fed, we had a significant amount of Democrats come over to endorse the principle, and they liked the idea of openness and knowing what's going on, and they supported it. But usually there will be some patriotic explanation of why you can't do that. Secrets are very important. That's one thing that I would do if anybody has to ask me. I would suggest all this stuff about papers taking the papers home from your office, from the presidential office. Why don't we? I'll bet you could reclassify or eliminate all that activity, or reclassify a bunch of it and make it not so interesting for that to happen. I don't know what ever comes of all those records. And when you saw that Biden's garage, it looks like they might just sit in a garage and rot away.
Yeah, exactly. Next to his Corvette. Well, the thing is, I almost start wondering whether this whole thing is by design. Because if you look at this next clip, this is from the article on Real Clear Investigations. The sheer tonnage of supplies and speed of its shipment, according to the GAO report, has left the Pentagon without the quality data to assess its delivery. So if you read about that and think about it, what they're saying is basically they were in so much of a rush to provide anything and everything to the Ukrainians, they couldn't be bothered to stop and track and think about, is this something good? Is it going to fall into the wrong hands? And it's just essentially, all of this, it just follows the policy of racing into this war without thinking twice.